I didn't cry when I found her little pink shoes by the edge of the mud. I didn't even cry when the police handed me the cold stamped death certificate. But when I plugged her damaged smartwatch into my computer and heard the heavy splash, followed by the deep, cruel laughter of 4 grown men, that was the exact moment the father in me died and the sniper woke up. My name is Victor. For 15 years, I was a phantom. I was a Tier 1 precision marksman, a ghost deployed to the darkest corners of the earth to solve problems no one else could fix. I survived deserts, mountains, and the kind of violence most people only see in nightmares. But none of that prepared me for the silence of my own house. I had been overseas on a 6-month private security contract. I took the job to pay for a specialized behavioral therapy program for my daughter Harper. She was 10 years old. Harper was autistic, and she saw the world in a way that made everything else look dull. She loved patterns, numbers, and the sound of rain. But more than anything, she loved the lake near our house. The local police called it a tragic accident. They said it happened all the time with special needs children. They said she just wandered away from her caregiver, slipped on the wet rocks, and went into the deep water. When I got off the plane and rushed straight to the precinct, my chest felt like it was caved in. I sat in a cramped, gray office across from Captain Julian. He was a heavy-set man with tired eyes and a perfectly rehearsed face of sympathy. Standing right behind him was a younger cop, Officer Blake. Captain Julian slid a manila folder across the desk. He told me they did everything they could. He said the water was just too cold and by the time they pulled her out, it was over. He put his hand on my shoulder and told me to go home and try to find some peace. But I didn't feel peace. I felt a cold, creeping wrongness in the back of my neck. It was the same instinct that had kept me alive in combat zones. As a sniper, my entire life depended on reading micro-expressions, watching the wind, and seeing the things other people missed. I looked at Officer Blake. Harper's toys were still lined up perfectly on the living room rug. Her favorite blue blanket was folded on the couch. I sat down on the floor, surrounded by her things, and finally let the grief hit me. I wept until my lungs burned. I wept for the little girl who would never run to the door to greet me again. Inside the manila folder they gave me, there was a plastic evidence bag containing the personal items she had on her when they found her, a wet hair tie, a small plastic dinosaur, and her smartwatch. It was a rugged waterproof watch I bought for her before I left. Harper loved it because it counted her steps and she liked to reach exactly 10,000 steps a day. The screen was cracked and the casing was scratched, but it was designed to survive deep water. The police probably thought it was just a broken toy. They didn't know I had custom flashed the software to constantly record audio in short bursts, just in case she ever got lost, and I needed to track her environment. My hands were shaking as I unscrewed the backplate of the watch. I pulled out the tiny water-sealed memory card, slid it into an adapter, and plugged it into my laptop. My military encryption software went to work recovering the corrupted files from the day she died. There were hundreds of audio clips. Most of them were just the wind, the sound of her walking, the rustle of the trees. I skipped to the very last file. The timestamp was 4:12 p.m., the exact time the coroner said she drowned. I put on my headphones and pressed play. At first, there was only the sound of the water lapping against the shore. Then I heard Harper's voice. She was humming her favorite tune, a nervous habit she had when she was overstimulated. She wasn't near the deep edge. She was walking on the gravel path. Then the heavy crunch of boots. Not 1 pair, 4. "Hey, look at this one," a man's voice sneered. It was sharp and arrogant. Harper's humming stopped. I could hear her breathing pick up. She was scared. "Go away," she said softly. "I'm counting." "She's counting, boys," another voice mocked. "What's wrong with her? Is she broken?" A third voice laughed. I sat frozen in my chair, the blood turning to ice in my veins. I recognized the first voice. I had just heard it a few hours ago in the precinct. It was Officer Blake. The audio continued. There was a sudden scuffle. Harper let out a sharp cry of panic. "Grab her arms." Someone grunted. "Let's see if she can swim." Blake laughed. There was a violent splash. The sound of freezing water violently hitting the microphone. Then Harper started thrashing. She was choking, desperately gasping for air, and over the sound of my little girl drowning, I heard them, all 4 of them. They weren't trying to help her. They weren't calling for backup. They were laughing. The laughter went on, echoing over the water until Harper's thrashing slowly stopped. And then the audio file went dead. I sat in the dark for a long time. The father who had walked into this house was dead. He drowned in that lake with his daughter. I slowly stood up and walked down to the basement. I pushed aside the boxes of old winter coats and found the heavy steel door hidden behind the drywall. I entered the biometric coat. The heavy locks clacked open. I pulled out a massive dust-covered Pelican case. I popped the latches. Inside, resting in custom-cut foam, was my matte black long-range sniper rifle. They thought they had drowned a helpless, broken little girl. They didn't know they had just woken up a monster. I promised myself right then, looking at the cold steel of the barrel, every single man who laughed that day was going to feel exactly what my daughter felt. And I was going to start with Officer Blake. The sun rose over the city, casting a pale, sickly light through the living room windows, but the cold inside my chest had become permanent. I had not moved from my chair in the basement. My long-range rifle rested across my knees, heavy and familiar, but it was not time to pull the trigger yet. A professional does not act on blind rage. A ghost gathers intel before he strikes. I had spent the last 8 hours doing what the military trained me to do, analyzing the enemy. I ran the terrible audio file of my daughter's final moments through a sound equalizer on my laptop. I stripped away the wind. I muted the splashing water. I isolated the voices of the monsters who drowned my little Harper. I already knew Officer Blake was the leader. I recognized his arrogant sneer from the captain's office, but I needed the other three. I memorized their vocal cadences until they were burned into my brain. One had a distinct breathy rasp, like a man who smoked 2 packs a day. Another had a deep, booming laugh that echoed from the bottom of his chest. The fourth voice was quieter, offering short, nervous grunts of agreement. By 8 o'clock in the morning, I showered, put on a simple, wrinkled gray suit, and practiced my expression in the mirror. I could not look like a Tier 1 operative preparing for an urban war. I had to look like exactly what they thought I was, a broken, defeated civilian, a grieving father asking for table scraps of closure. I drove back to the police precinct. The building smelled of stale coffee, wet floor wax, and cheap cologne. It looked like a normal place where normal people went for help, but the soldier in me saw the truth. It was a nest. "Can I help you, sir?" the desk sergeant asked, not looking up from his paperwork. "I am Victor," I said, forcing my voice to tremble just enough to sound pathetic. "I am here to sign the final release forms for my daughter, for Harper," the sergeant sighed, pointing his pen toward a row of hard wooden benches against the wall. "Have a seat. Captain Julian will bring the paperwork out when he has a minute." I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and lowered my head. To the casual observer, I was just crying, but beneath my hands, my eyes were wide open, watching the reflections in the glass partition of the front doors. I closed my eyes for a moment, mapping the room using only my ears. "Hey, grab me a coffee, will you?" My heart completely stopped. There it was, the breathy, scratching rasp. I slowly opened my eyes and looked toward the hallway leading to the break room. A tall, wiry officer with a bruised knuckle was leaning against the doorframe, chewing on a toothpick. I read the silver name tag pinned to his uniform. "Logan, only if you pay for it this time, you cheap coward." The deep, booming laugh rattled the glass of the break room window. A massive, broad-shouldered officer walked up, slapping Logan hard on the back. He had a thick neck and cruel, empty eyes. His name tag read Kyle. That was 3, Blake, Logan, and Kyle. Suddenly, the door to the captain's office clicked open. Captain Julian stepped out holding a clipboard. He did not say a word to Logan or Kyle, but as he passed them, I saw the micro-expressions. Julian gave them a sharp, nervous glare. Logan immediately stopped chewing his toothpick. Kay looked down at the floor. It was a look of absolute complicity. Julian might not have been at the lake that day, but he knew exactly what his men had done. He was the shield protecting them. The whole precinct was infected with the same rot. "Sign here, Victor," Captain Julian said gently, handing me the clipboard. "And again, we are so incredibly sorry for your loss." I looked up at him, letting a single tear fall down my cheek. "Thank you, Captain. You have all been so helpful." I signed the paper, stood up, and walked out the double doors. The moment the cool outside air hit my face, the trembling stopped. The tears dried instantly, the grieving father vanished, and the sniper fully returned. I did not drive back to my empty house. I drove to the industrial sector on the edge of the city to a rusted, forgotten storage facility. I rented the unit under a fake name 5 years ago, a habit from my time operating in hostile territories. I rolled up the heavy metal door and stepped into the darkness, pulling a single chain to turn on the overhead bulb. The basement at my house held my rifle, but this unit held my entire operational system. I unlocked 3 heavy military crates. Inside was the gear that did not exist on any government registry: night vision optics, encrypted communication jammers, specialized subsonic ammunition designed to penetrate reinforced glass without altering the bullet's trajectory. I spent the next 4 hours preparing. I stripped down my rifle and oiled every single moving part until the action cycled smoother than glass. I loaded the heavy brass cartridges into the magazines one by one, feeling the cold, deadly weight of each round. As I reached into my tactical vest to check the pocket zippers, my fingers brushed against something stiff. I pulled it out. It was a folded piece of construction paper. I carefully opened it under the harsh yellow light. It was a drawing Harper had made for me before my last deployment. It was a clumsy, beautiful crayon drawing of a green turtle. At the top, in her messy, uneven handwriting, it said, "Come home safe, Daddy. I am counting the days." My chest heaved. I traced my thumb over the green crayon marks. The memory of her soft, humming voice echoed in my ears, instantly followed by the mocking, cruel laughter of Blake, Logan, and Kyle. I carefully folded the drawing and placed it right over my heart, securing it inside the interior pocket of my combat vest. "I am home, Harper," I whispered to the empty concrete room, "and I am going to make them pay." By nightfall, the rain had started, a heavy freezing downpour that washed the streets empty. It was perfect weather for hunting. I had hacked into the police dispatcher's frequency using a portable decryptor, tracking the cruiser locations. Officer Blake was off duty. But men like Blake do not go home to their families. They go looking for trouble. I tracked his personal vehicle to a city industrial district near the docks. He parked his car behind an abandoned meatpacking plant. It was a known location for illegal high-stakes poker games run by local syndicates. The kind of place a dirty cop goes to collect his bribes and drink expensive liquor while the city sleeps. I parked my motorcycle 3 blocks away, hidden entirely in the shadows of an overpass. I pulled the heavy waterproof rifle bag onto my back and began the slow, silent climb up the rusted fire escape of the building across the street. The rain hit my face like tiny needles, but I did not blink. I reached the flat, tar-covered roof and set down my bag. I was exactly 800 yards away from the large grime-covered window of the meatpacking plant's upper office. I laid out my rubber mat, set up my bipod, and slid the heavy rifle into position. Through the thermal scope, the world turned into a canvas of glowing orange and red. I found the window. Inside, 4 men were sitting around a table playing cards. I zoomed in until the crosshairs rested perfectly on the center of Officer Blake's forehead. He was laughing, tossing chips onto the table. He had no idea he was already a ghost. The rain was a steady freezing sheet against the tar roof. I adjusted the magnification ring on my thermal optic, wiping a drop of icy water from the lens. 820 yard. The wind was blowing crossways from the east at 7 miles per hour, cutting violently through the rusted industrial towers of the meatpacking district. I dialed the elevation turret on my scope, the mechanical clicks barely audible over the roaring storm. Through the glowing green and orange display of my scope, Officer Blake sat completely relaxed. He was drinking something dark out of a short, heavy glass, throwing his head back in laughter as he tossed a pile of poker chips onto the wooden table. That laugh, it was the exact same arrogant, cruel sound that haunted my every waking second. The sound that swallowed my daughter's final, terrified cries in that freezing lake. My grip tightened on the pistol grip of the rifle until my knuckles turned completely white. A lesser man, a civilian driven by blind rage, would have just taken the shot right then. A single smooth trigger pull, and Blake's brain would be painted across the cinder block wall behind him. He would be dead before the supersonic crack of the rifle even reached the broken glass of the window. But I did not want him to die peacefully. That would be an insult to Harper. I needed him to understand the absolute terror of the dark water. I needed him to know that the devil had come to collect the debt he owed. I controlled my breathing, settling into the familiar freezing stillness of the sniper's trance. Inhale deeply, exhale completely, pause at the bottom of the breath. The illuminated crosshairs drifted slightly with my heartbeat, finally resting precisely on the thick grime-covered glass of the window just 3 inches to the left of Blake's face. I slowly squeezed the 2-stage trigger. The rifle roared, a suppressed but violent thump that slammed the stock back into my shoulder with brutal force. The heavy brass casing ejected automatically, spinning into a muddy puddle beside my elbow. 800 yards away, the thick industrial window shattered into a million glittering, deadly pieces. The precision bullet ripped through the air, completely obliterating the whiskey glass right out of Blake's right hand, showering his face in sharp crystal and alcohol. Through the thermal optic, the room erupted into absolute frantic chaos. The three syndicate thugs playing cards with him threw themselves violently to the floor, screaming and knocking the heavy wooden table over for makeshift cover. But Officer Blake froze. For one agonizing, beautiful second, he just stared at his empty, bleeding hand in total confusion. Then the realization crashed into him. He was a cop. He knew exactly what a shattered window and an exploding glass meant. He knew what a precision sniper strike looked like. His face, glowing pale orange in the thermal display, twisted into pure, unfiltered horror. He scrambled backward in a blind panic, slipping on the spilled alcohol and broken glass. He crawled on his hands and knees like a pathetic, frightened insect toward the deep shadow of a concrete structural pillar. "You cannot swim away from me, Blake," I whispered into the freezing wind, keeping my eye locked to the scope. "There is no shore for you." He peeked his head out from behind the concrete pillar, his chest heaving. His eyes were wide, frantic, scanning the pitch-black darkness of the storm outside the shattered window. He pulled his service weapon from his shoulder holster, pointing it blindly out into the night. His hands were shaking so violently he nearly dropped the gun. It was a useless, desperate gesture. He could not see me. He could not even comprehend what was hunting him. I adjusted my aim, shifting the crosshairs down and to the right. I let him taste the suffocating fear for exactly 5 more seconds. I wanted him to feel the same helpless, breathless terror my little girl felt when the water closed over her head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I pulled the trigger again. The second round cut perfectly through the howling storm, threading the impossible gap between the jagged window frame and the concrete pillar. The bullet struck him dead center in the chest, folding his heavy body backward like a broken doll. He collapsed against the floor, his weapon clattering uselessly away into the darkness. He did not get back up. I did not wait to watch the syndicate thugs scramble for the door. I smoothly cycled the bolt, caught the smoking brass casing in the air before it could hit the roof, and slipped it into my tactical vest pocket. I leave no brass behind. I leave no evidence. I am a ghost. I broke down the rifle with practiced mechanical speed, packed the parts securely into the heavy Pelican case, and disappeared down the rusted fire escape into the pouring ring. By the time I reached my hidden motorcycle in the alleyway, my encrypted police scanner suddenly crackled to life in my earpiece. The dispatcher's voice was completely frantic, breaking protocols, shouting over the static. "Officer down. We have an officer down at the meatpacking district. Shots fired. Massive trauma. Suspect is unknown. I repeat, suspect is unknown." I put on my black helmet and started the silent electric motor. Captain Julian and his corrupt precinct were about to have a very long, very terrifying night. 1 monster was dead, 3 remained. The police scanner in my earpiece was a symphony of absolute terror. Sirens wailed as frantic voices talked over one another. Then a single raspy voice broke through the chaos, breathless and trembling. It was Officer Logan. He was screaming for tactical backup, his arrogant swagger completely erased by the cold reality of a sniper's bullet. Fear is a beautiful, highly contagious disease. I smiled in the dark. Logan did not go back to the central precinct. A coward like him, suddenly realizing his partner was just executed through a reinforced window from half a mile away, only does one predictable thing. He runs to a deep hole and pulls the dirt in over his head to hide. I tracked his police cruiser's GPS signal using the same military-grade digital decryptor I used to find Blake. The glowing blue dot on my screen sped frantically out of the city limits, racing toward a remote concrete safe house used by the department for highly protected witnesses. The safe house was built like an underground bunker. It sat at the end of a long, muddy gravel road surrounded by dense pine trees. It featured thick cinder block walls, heavy steel-reinforced doors, and small narrow windows covered in thick iron grates. Logan parked his cruiser haphazardly on the overgrown front lawn. He left the driver's side door wide open, the interior dome light illuminating the falling rain in his frantic rush to get inside behind the heavy deadbolts. I watched him from the deep tree line 300 yards away. The heavy freezing rain masked the thermal signature of my tactical gear, making me completely invisible in the pitch-black woods. I slowly lowered myself into the wet mud, resting my heavy rifle on a moss-covered log. I did not want to just shoot him through the wall. My armor-piercing rounds could easily punch through the cheap cinder block of the safe house, but that was entirely too fast. It was too painless. He had to hear the echoes of his own cruelty before the end. He had to understand why the shadows were coming for him. I opened my waterproof laptop case, balancing it carefully on my knee in the mud. With a few rapid keystrokes, I bridged the digital connection between my portable decryptor and the local police communication relay tower, located a few miles away. I isolated the specific encrypted radio channel assigned to Logan's portable shoulder unit. I watched the green progress bar on my rugged screen slowly fill to 100% as the freezing rain washed over my numbed hands. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country, because the psychological justice I was about to deliver to this corrupt officer was going to be completely merciless. Once I had full administrative control over his radio, I locked out the external volume controls. He would not be able to turn it down and he would not be able to turn it off. I opened the audio file I had extracted from Harper's damaged smartwatch, the exact horrifying recording of my little girl's final moments. I set the software to loop indefinitely, took a deep breath, and pressed the transmit key. Through my thermal sniper optic, I watched Logan's glowing orange silhouette pacing frantically inside the small, echoing concrete room. Suddenly, he froze. The audio began playing loudly from the radio strapped to his chest. At first, it was just the gentle sound of the lake water and my little girl humming her nervous, beautiful tune. Then came the crunching boots on the gravel, and then the unmistakable cruel laughter of Logan, Blake, and Kyle. Through the thermal scope, I saw Logan's silhouette violently throw his hands over his ears. He stumbled backward, knocking over a heavy wooden chair. He frantically ripped the heavy radio from his duty belt, his fingers fumbling with the volume knobs. When it did not shut off, he hurled it violently against the cinder block wall, but military-grade police radios are built to survive explosions. The thick plastic housing did not crack, the audio just kept playing, Harper's terrified cries mixed with the heavy, violent splash of the freezing lake playing over and over in an endless, agonizing loop. Logan was trapped in a locked concrete cage with his own unforgivable sins. The psychological pressure was breaking him. He could not handle the crushing weight of the guilt, and he could not handle the suffocating fear of the unknown. He needed to know where the broadcast was coming from. In a moment of absolute blinding desperation, Logan made the final fatal mistake of his miserable life. He crawled on his hands and knees toward the narrow grated window to look outside. He slowly lifted his head, peering out into the darkness through a tiny 2-inch gap between the heavy steel bars. His eyes were wide and frantic, scanning the dark rain-soaked tree line. I settled my breathing, pulling the wet stock of my rifle firmly into my shoulder. The illuminated crosshairs rested perfectly on the tiny gap between the iron bars, directly in line with his forehead. I exhaled completely, letting the cold rain, the wind, and the anger fade away into a quiet, heavily focused tunnel. I gently squeezed the 2-stage trigger. The heavy rifle kicked violently against my shoulder. The specialized subsonic round zipped silently through the freezing rain, perfectly threading the 2-inch gap and the steel grate. The reinforced glass shattered inward in a spray of silver shards. Logan's glowing silhouette collapsed instantly, falling out of the window frame and crashing heavily against the concrete floor. The radio on the ground kept playing my daughter's final moments, but Logan would never hear anything ever again. 2 monsters down, 2 remained. I waited exactly 15 minutes in the freezing mud to ensure Captain Julian had not secretly dispatched a silent tactical team to follow Logan to the safe house. The dark woods remained completely still, save for the howling wind and the pouring rain. I packed my rifle into its waterproof case and moved silently across the muddy field, slipping through the shattered window into the bunker to retrieve the hacked radio and erase my digital footprint. The safe house smelled of ozone, copper, and damp concrete. Logan lay motionless on the floor. I reached down and finally crushed the blaring radio beneath the heavy heel of my combat boot, silencing the terrible audio. But as I bent down, a thick brown manila envelope slid out from the interior pocket of Logan's tactical vest. It was sealed with a red, highly classified police evidence stamp. I tore it open, shining my small red tactical flashlight on the folded documents inside. My breath completely caught in my throat. I looked at the cargo manifests, the offshore bank account routing numbers, and the detailed surveillance photographs of an abandoned warehouse located directly next to Harper's special needs school. The drowning was not a cruel joke gone terribly wrong. Harper had accidentally seen something she was never supposed to see. They murdered my autistic daughter to silence a witness, My blood ran completely cold as I realized Captain Julian was running a massive criminal empire, and my war had only just begun. The red beam of my tactical flashlight flickered over the crinkled documents I had just pulled from Logan's vest. I stood in the freezing, blood-spattered safe house, the cold rain blowing through the shattered window, but I didn't feel the chill anymore. I felt an absolute terrifying clarity. My hands, which had been perfectly steady when I pulled the trigger, were suddenly trembling. The papers were highly classified surveillance logs and shipping manifests, but they weren't official police business. They were a detailed blueprint of a massive illegal weapons smuggling operation. The dates, the times, the massive payouts, all routed through offshore accounts controlled directly by Captain Julian. But what made my stomach turn into a block of solid ice was the location listed on every single manifest. It was a massive abandoned industrial warehouse situated directly adjacent to the local lake. The exact same lake where Harper's special needs school took the children for their weekly nature walks. The exact lake where they found her floating. I traced my gloved finger over the last entry. The date was exactly 4 weeks ago, the exact day my little girl drowned. The log detailed a massive multi-million-dollar weapons drop scheduled for 4 p.m. Harper's smartwatch recording had started at 4:12 p.m. The sickening truth crashed over me like a concrete wall. This wasn't a tragic accident. This wasn't even a cruel, twisted joke gone too far. My beautiful, innocent daughter had wandered away from her group, drawn to the patterns of the ripples on the water, and she had accidentally witnessed a syndicate weapons exchange orchestrated by the very police officers sworn to protect her city. She was autistic. She didn't understand what she was looking at. She was just counting her steps. But Blake, Logan, and Kyle had seen her watching them, and Captain Julian, sitting safely behind his heavy wooden desk at the precinct, had given the order to silence a 10-year-old witness. They drowned her to protect their dirty money. They drowned my entire world to keep their secret safe. I folded the documents carefully and slid them into the waterproof pouch of my tactical vest, right next to the crayon drawing of the green turtle. My breathing slowed down. The rage that had been boiling inside me since the moment I stepped off the plane suddenly hardened into something infinitely more dangerous. It became a cold, calculating machine. I did not want to just kill them anymore. I wanted to completely dismantle their empire, expose their corruption to the world, and burn their legacy to the ground. But I was just one man, a ghost operating in the shadows. I needed a weapon that bullets couldn't provide. I needed the law to finish what the sniper started. I stepped over Logan's body, erased my digital footprints from the safehouse mainframe, and vanished back into the freezing storm. By dawn, the city was in absolute chaos. The news cycle was running non-stop coverage. 2 decorated police officers had been assassinated in less than 12 hours. The mayor had declared a state of emergency. Heavily armed tactical units locked down every major intersection, establishing blockades and searching every vehicle leaving the city limits. Captain Julian had weaponized the entire police force to hunt me down, painting me as a deranged domestic terrorist. I sat in the dark corner of a 24-hour diner on the edge of the city, wearing a faded baseball cap pulled low over my eyes and a heavy, unremarkable coat. I watched the muted television above the counter. Captain Julian was giving a live press conference, his face a mask of manufactured grief. He promised the city that the monster responsible for murdering his finest officers would be hunted down without mercy. I sipped my black coffee, feeling the heavy loaded handgun pressed securely against my ribs. I needed to move, but I couldn't fight an entire militarized police force alone. I needed someone inside the system, someone who already knew the precinct was rotten. I pulled out a small encrypted burner phone I had purchased the night before. I had spent hours cross-referencing public court records and internal affairs complaints against Captain Julian. One name kept appearing buried beneath mountains of dismissed cases and judicial red tape. Amelia. She was a relentless, fiercely independent defense attorney who had built her entire career trying to expose the corruption within Julian's precinct. She had filed dozens of civil rights lawsuits against Blake, Logan, and Kyle, only to have them mysteriously thrown out by dirty judges. She was a pariah in the legal community, hated by the police, but she was the only person in this city who hated Captain Julian as much as I did. I dialed her private office number. It rang 3 times before she answered. Her voice was sharp, exhausted, and deeply suspicious. Law offices of Amelia Vance. If you're calling from the precinct to threaten me again, you'll have to get in line. I am not a cop, Amelia, I said quietly, keeping my voice low so the waitress wouldn't hear. But I am the reason Captain Julian is currently losing his mind on live television. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. The background noise of rustling papers in her office completely stopped. "Who is this?" she whispered, her voice tightening. "Do you have any idea how dangerous it is to even make that claim right now? Half the city is looking for you." "They are looking for a ghost," I replied. "I have something you have been trying to find for 5 years. I have the physical shipping manifests, the offshore routing numbers, and the undeniable proof that Captain Julian runs the entire coastal weapons syndicate." Amelia let out a shaky breath. "Why are you calling me? What do you want?" "I want to burn his empire to the ground," I said, my voice as cold as the lake water that took my daughter. "But I need your help to make sure the evidence doesn't disappear when I am finished with the rest of his men." "Meet me at the old Municipal Archives building in 20 minutes, she said instantly. "Come through the freight elevator in the alley. If you are lying to me or if anyone follows you, I will personally hand you over to the feds." "Understood," I said, and hung up the phone. The game had officially changed. I stood up, left a $5 bill on the table, and walked out into the pouring rain. I was heading straight into the heart of the enemy's territory, and I was about to find out if this lawyer was a shield I could trust or a trap that would get me killed. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country because the war was about to escalate into the streets. The old Municipal Archives building looked dead from the outside. Rain slid down the cracked stone walls. Half the windows were dark and the rusted freight entrance in the alley looked like it had not been used in years. But dead places are useful. Dead places do not ask questions. They just keep secrets. I killed the motorcycle 2 blocks away and finished the last stretch on foot. My hood was low, my shoulders relaxed, my right hand free inside my coat. I checked every rooftop line, every parked car, every reflection in the wet glass of the alley doors. Nobody moved. No engine idled too long, no cigarette glow in the shadows. If Amelia had sold me out, the trap was hidden well. I reached the freight elevator and pressed the call button once. Nothing. Then the old metal gate rattled and the elevator groaned its way down from somewhere above. When it opened, Amelia stood inside alone, one hand on the gate, the other holding a compact pistol aimed directly at my chest. She was smaller than I expected, but her eyes were sharp and steady. No panic, no wasted motion. "Hands where I can see them," she said. I slowly raised them. "Fair. You came alone?" "Yes." "Turn around." I did. She checked me fast and professionally, finding the handgun under my coat and the knife at my back. "You carry enough steel for a small war," she said. "I am in one." She studied me for a long second, then lowered the pistol just enough to let me step inside. "If this is a lie, Victor, you won't leave this building." The elevator gate slammed shut. It dragged us upward through a shaft that screamed with every floor. I watched Amelia in the dim yellow light. She looked exhausted, like she had been fighting the same battle for years with nothing but paper and stubbornness. When the elevator stopped, she led me into a huge records room filled with steel shelving, broken cabinets, and stacks of old city files. A single desk lamp lit the center table. The rest of the floor was swallowed in darkness. "Put it there," she said. I pulled Logan's envelope from my coat and laid it under the light. Amelia didn't touch it at first. She looked at me instead. "Before I open that, I want the truth. Did you kill Blake and Logan?" "Yes." Her jaw tightened, but she did not flinch. "Then, Captain Julian is telling the truth about one thing." "No," I said quietly. "He is telling the part that helps him survive." That made her pause. She opened the envelope. At first, she scanned like a lawyer, fast, controlled, skeptical. Then her eyes slowed. She flipped back to the first page, then to the shipping manifests, then the routing numbers, then the surveillance photographs of the warehouse by the lake. Her face changed. "He finally made a mistake," she whispered. "No, his men did." Amelia set the papers down carefully like they might explode. "These account codes tied Julian directly to offshore transfers. These dates line up with sealed evidence disappearances from 3 homicide cases and this warehouse." She swallowed. "I filed a records request on that place 2 years ago. The file vanished." "It was not just smuggling," I said. "Harper saw something there." Amelia looked up. "You know that?" I nodded once. "She was not killed because she wandered too far. She was killed because Blake, Logan, and Kyle thought a child had seen too much." The room went very still. Amelia closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, there was no hesitation left in her. Then, this is bigger than police corruption. This is organized murder. It always was. She paced once around the table, thinking fast. If we take this straight to local prosecutors, Julian buries it. If we send it to state police, he gets warned before they move. If we go federal, we need time, chain of custody, and a way to prove the files are authentic. I can get more. I know, she said, looking directly at me. That's what worries me. Before I could answer, her phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at the screen and went pale. What? I asked. That building across from the diner. She said the city traffic camera caught your face under the awning when you made the call from the burner. Julian pushed your image to every patrol unit in the county 20 minutes ago. I stepped toward the windowless dark at the edge of the room. How fast can he lock this area down? He already has. As if the city had heard her, distant sirens rose outside. 1, then 3, then many. Tires hissed on wet pavement below. Doors slammed. Amelia killed the desk lamp instantly. The whole records floor vanished into black. Freight elevator, I whispered. Too obvious. He'll send the first team there. I listened. Boots below. Metal clanging in the shaft. Radio static. They're inside. I said, I know. Amelia grabbed my sleeve and pulled me between two shelving aisles, moving fast through the maze like she had memorized it. We stopped at a locked records cage at the back wall. She knelt, opened a floor panel hidden beneath a broken file box, and looked up at me. You trust me? No, I said. Good. Get in. A narrow maintenance tunnel ran under the records floor. It smelled like dust, oil, and wet concrete. Amelia dropped in first and I followed, pulling the panel closed above us, just as heavy footsteps thundered across the room overhead. Voices shouted, "Search every aisle. Check the cages." A flashlight beam sliced through a crack in the floor panel, then moved on. In the dark tunnel, Amelia crawled ahead and spoke in a whisper. 3 years ago, a city auditor found money missing from redevelopment funds. 2 days later, he was arrested on planted fraud charges. His wife hired me. I started digging. Every road led to Julian. How many judges are dirty? I asked. At least 2, maybe more. And Kyle, he's Julian's attack dog. When intimidation fails, Julian sends Kyle. We reached a junction where the tunnel split in two. Amelia stopped and turned to me. Even in the dark, I could see the tension in her face. There's something else, she said. I didn't tell you on the phone because I needed to see if the evidence was real. Say it. Kyle isn't being hidden. She said he's being moved tomorrow night. Moved where? Federal transit convoy on paper, but it's fake. Julian is relocating him to a private safe site outside the city until this blows over. A cold calm settled over me. Route. I don't have the final map yet. You will. She stared at me for a moment. Victor, once I give you that route, there's no pretending I stayed clean. There was never any clean left, I said. Above us, a loud crash shook dust from the tunnel ceiling. They were tearing the room apart now. Amelia led me to a steel ladder and pushed up a hatch at the far end of the maintenance shaft. We emerged into a narrow boiler room behind the building. The air was hot and metallic. An old rear service door stood half blocked by busted piping. I moved to it, then stopped. Through the small wired glass pane, I saw blue and red lights strobing across the rain. 2 patrol cars covered the alley exit. Officers were spreading out with rifles. Amelia saw them too. We can't go that way, she said. No, I replied, already looking upward at the exposed pipes, the ladder cage and the old roof access hatch, 20 feet above us. But they just made their mistake. I slung the rifle case tighter across my back and looked at Amelia. Get me the route for Kyle. She gave one hard nod. Then I reached for the ladder and started climbing toward the roof. The rain turned from a steady downpour into a blinding sheet of water by the time I breached the roof of the archives building. The freezing wind whipped across the flat tar surface, tearing at my coat. I didn't stop moving. I sprinted low toward the edge, dropping to one knee behind the low parapet wall. Below me, the alley was a chaotic sea of flashing red and blue lights. Captain Julian had sent 3 tactical units to lock down the perimeter, but they were searching for a man on foot. They weren't looking up. I pulled a customized silent grappling hook from my tactical rig, anchored it to a heavy steel ventilation pipe, and swung out into the empty air over the adjacent alleyway. I hit the roof of the neighboring building, cut the line, and vanished into the storm long before the first cop even reached the boiler room. I spent the next 20 hours completely off the grid, hidden inside a rusted abandoned subway maintenance tunnel beneath the financial district. I cleaned my gear, I checked my ammunition, and I waited for Amelia's call. At exactly 4 p.m., the burner phone vibrated against the damp concrete. "I have the route." Amelia's voice crackled through the encrypted line. She sounded exhausted, but absolutely determined. "Julian isn't using a marked police convoy. It's too high profile. He's moving Kyle in a private, heavily armored tactical transport, disguised as a city utility truck. They are taking him to a secure compound outside state lines." "What is the extraction path?" I asked, pulling up a digital map of the city on my rugged laptop. "They are avoiding the highways. Too many cameras," she replied. "They are taking the old industrial corridor downtown. They will pass through the 4th Street underpass in exactly 45 minutes. Victor, there are 6 heavily armed SWAT operators inside that truck with him. They are wearing level 4 ceramic plates. You cannot just shoot your way through that." "I am not going to shoot my way through them," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am going to make them open the door." I hung up the phone and began to pack my gear. The industrial corridor was a graveyard of abandoned factories and narrow concrete-walled streets. It was a perfect, inescapable bottleneck. It was a kill zone. I arrived at the 4th Street underpass 30 minutes before the convoy. The street was narrow, flanked by towering brick walls and deep shadow doorways. I didn't need my sniper rifle for this operation. I needed absolute overwhelming chaos. I parked a stolen heavy-duty tow truck diagonally across the exit of the underpass, completely blocking the road. I shot out the streetlights, plunging the corridor into total darkness, save for the ambient orange glow of the city reflecting off the wet pavement. I climbed up the rusted fire escape of an abandoned textile factory. Perching myself on a second-story steel balcony directly above the kill zone, I pulled my suppressed short-barreled tactical assault rifle from my bag and loaded a magazine of specialized armor-piercing incendiary rounds. I didn't want to kill the SWAT operators. They were just pawns following orders, unaware of the deep rot inside their captain. I only wanted the monster hiding behind them. 10 minutes later, the heavy rumbling sound of a massive diesel engine echoed through the wet streets. Through my night vision goggles, the fake utility truck looked like a rolling fortress. Thick steel plating covered the windows, and heavy run-flat tires ground against the asphalt. The truck turned into the underpass and immediately slammed on its brakes, the massive tires screeching violently as the driver spotted the tow truck blocking their path. The moment the truck stopped, I unleashed hell. I didn't aim at the cab. I aimed directly at the truck's massive engine block. I squeezed the trigger, sending a devastating 3-round burst of incendiary ammunition through the heavy steel grille. The specialized bullets detonated inside the engine compartment with a deafening metallic crunch. Thick, blinding white smoke instantly erupted from the hood, completely engulfing the front of the vehicle. The driver panicked and threw the truck into reverse. Trying to back out of the underpass, I reached into my vest, pulled the pin on a Militaria flashbang grenade, and dropped it perfectly through the narrow gap in the roof hatch of the truck's armored cab. The explosion was a blinding, deafening crack of thunder. The truck violently lurched to a halt. The driver and the passenger were instantly incapacitated, completely deafened and blinded by the million-candle power flash. But the back of the truck, the armored troop compartment where Kyle was hiding, was still sealed tight. "Contact! We are under attack!" A frantic voice screamed over the radio frequency I had hacked. Through the thick, swirling white smoke, the heavy rear steel doors of the truck kicked open. 3 SWAT operators poured out into the narrow street, their rifles raised, sweeping the darkness. They were highly trained, but they were fighting a ghost in the dark. I fired a single precision shot into the wet asphalt directly between the first operator's boots. The spark and the sharp cracking sound made him flinch violently backward. Before he could recover, I dropped 2 tear gas canisters directly into the center of their formation. The narrow street instantly filled with a thick, choking cloud of chemical gas. The SWAT operators stumbled, coughing violently, their vision completely obscured. They were disoriented, firing blindly into the air, completely neutralized without a single drop of their blood being spilled. Through my thermal optics, I saw the massive, terrified silhouette of Officer Kyle, still cowering inside the back of the armored truck. He was too afraid to step out into the smoke. He thought the steel walls would protect him. I secured my rifle to my back, grabbed the steel railing of the balcony, and dropped 20 feet straight down onto the roof of the armored truck. The heavy thud of my boots echoed inside the metal box. Kyle screamed. I swung down over the back of the truck, landing silently on the wet asphalt right in front of the open doors. The tear gas swirled around me, clinging to my tactical mask. Kyle was backed into the furthest corner of the truck, his service weapon shaking violently in his hands. "You!" Kyle screamed, his deep, booming voice cracking in absolute terror. He fired 3 wild shots into the smoke, but his hands were shaking too hard to aim. The bullets sparked harmlessly against the concrete walls behind me. I walked slowly up the metal ramp and stepped inside the truck. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country because the justice Kyle was about to face would echo forever. "You laughed, Kyle," I said softly, my voice distorted and terrifying through the gas mask when my daughter was drowning in the dark. "You laughed." He dropped his empty gun, falling to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. I raised my weapon, 3 monsters down, 1 remained. Kay dropped to his knees so fast the metal floor rang beneath him. The smoke was still thick inside the armored truck. He was coughing, shaking, trying to speak, but fear had crushed his voice. A few seconds earlier, he had been hiding behind armored steel and armed men. Now he looked exactly like what he really was, a coward who had mistaken a badge for protection. I stepped closer. "You were there?" I said. Kyle's eyes darted around the truck, searching for some exit that didn't exist. "Victor, listen to me. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. That line hit me harder than a bullet. Not supposed to happen. As if my daughter's death had only been a mistake in their schedule. As if Harper's last breath had been an inconvenience." My hand tightened around the rifle. "She kept saying she was counting," I said quietly. "She was scared, and you laughed." Kay started crying. Real tears. Ugly choking sobs. Blake started it. Logan pushed her first. I told them to stop. "You laughed." He shut his eyes. That was the answer. I did not scream. I did not rush him. My anger had moved far beyond noise. I raised the weapon, and Kyle looked at the barrel like he was staring into a hole cut into the end of the world. "Julian," I said. "Where is he?" Kyle's lips trembled. "Main headquarters, top floor, tactical lockdown. He moved everything there. Hard drives, cash, evidence. He says if he survives tonight, he can still bury all of it. Who else knows? No one who matters. The others are scared. Someone out." He swallowed hard. "Victor, please. I have kids." For 1 second, the world went still. Kids. He had just reached for the one thing he had helped destroy in me. Maybe he thought fatherhood was a shield. Maybe he thought saying the word would make me lower the rifle. Instead, it made Harper's face rise so clearly in my mind that I could barely breathe. Her little blue raincoat. Her careful hands lining up colored pencils by size. Her soft voice saying, "I am counting, Daddy." I pulled the trigger once. The shot was short and final inside the steel truck. Then there was only the fading ring of metal and the sound of the rain outside. I stood there for a moment staring at the body, but I felt no victory. Kyle's death did not bring Harper back. It did not warm the lake. It did not erase the recording on the watch. It only cleared one more step on the road leading to Julian. I left the truck through the gas and smoke, crossed the dark underpass, and disappeared before the first backup units pushed into the corridor. An hour later, I was outside the cemetery. Rain had followed me there too, softer now, a cold whisper across stone and grass. The gates were locked for the night, but locks are made for ordinary people. I climbed over the sidewall and walked through rows of silent graves until I found Harper. Her headstone was small, too small. I stood over it with water dripping from my coat and mud drying on my boots. For a long time I couldn't kneel. I had crossed cities under gunfire, watched men die through thermal optics, and crawled through fire for missions most people would never know existed. But standing in front of that stone took more out of me than any battlefield ever had. When I finally lowered myself to the wet grass, something inside me broke open. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The words came out rough, like they had been tearing through my throat for days. "I should have been here. I should have seen it. I should have known." Rain slid down the carved letters of her name. I touched the stone with shaking fingers. The sniper in me understood distance, wind, timing, entry points, kill zones, but the father in me could not understand the simplest thing of all. How the world kept moving after Harper stopped breathing. Cars still passed on the road beyond the cemetery, traffic lights still changed, coffee still poured in diners, people still laughed somewhere. It felt wrong, it felt unbearable. I bowed my head against the stone and let the grief hit without resisting it. Not the rage, not the mission, just the grief. Pure and crushing, I cried there in the rain like a man with nothing left to protect except a promise. After a while, I reached into my coat and pulled out the folded turtle drawing, The paper was worn now from being carried close to my chest. I opened it carefully and laid it at the base of the headstone, weighing the corners down with small stones so the wind wouldn't take it. Tomorrow, I said, it ends tomorrow. My burner phone vibrated in my pocket. I wiped my face, stood up slowly, and answered without looking at the screen. It was Amelia. Her voice was low and urgent. Julian just moved to full emergency lockdown. Main headquarters is sealed. He's burning files in the evidence sublo, and he's transferring the rest to an off-book server room upstairs. I know where he is, I said. There's more, she replied. He found out someone leaked Kyle's route. He thinks I'm the source. Are you safe? There was a pause. No, she said. And Victor, if you're going after him, you need to go now. By morning, there won't be anything left to expose. I looked down at Harper's grave one last time. The rain had washed the mud from the stone. Her name looked clean again. I ended the call, slid the phone back into my pocket, and turned toward the cemetery wall. The tears were gone. The shaking had stopped. Grief had done what rage could not. It had sharpened me. Julian was inside his fortress, surrounded by armed men, locked doors, and the false belief that concrete could save him. He was wrong. The main police headquarters stood in the center of the city like a massive concrete tomb. It was surrounded by a 10-foot steel fence, spiked at the top, and bathed in the harsh glare of halogen floodlights. Captain Julian had turned the entire precinct into a fortress of paranoia. Armed tactical officers patrolled the perimeter in pairs, their rifles held tight across their chests. They were terrified. They knew 3 of their own had been systematically erased by a ghost, and they knew the ghost was coming for the head of the snake tonight. I watched the patrol routes through my thermal scope from the roof of a parking garage across the street. I didn't have time for a slow, methodical siege. Amelia was compromised. Julian was burning the evidence of his syndicate, and if I didn't get inside before dawn, Harper's murder would be buried forever beneath ash and deleted hard drives. I checked the digital blueprints Amelia had sent me before her phone went dark. The building was heavily fortified on the ground level, but Julian had made a critical, arrogant mistake. He believed the threat would come through the front door. He had completely ignored the rooftop ventilation system that fed directly into the central elevator shafts. I slung my rifle over my shoulder, pulled down my tactical mask, and fired my silent grappling hook across the street. The heavy steel hook bit deeply into the concrete lip of the precinct's roof. I stepped off the edge of the parking garage and swung through the freezing rain. My body entirely swallowed by the darkness, I landed silently on the wet tar of the police headquarters. I moved like a shadow across the roof, bypassing the thermal security cameras with specialized infrared-absorbing camouflage netting. The heavy steel grating was secured with thick industrial bolts, but a concentrated dose of thermite paste melted through the locks in less than 10 seconds. I pulled the grate aside and dropped into the pitch-black ventilation shaft. The air inside was stale and humming with the sound of massive industrial fans. I crawled on my stomach for 40 yards, the metal ducting echoing slightly beneath me. I reached the main junction directly above the central elevator shaft. I popped the vent cover and looked down into the dark, greasy abyss. I secured my rappelling harness to a heavy crossbeam and began the slow, silent descent. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. Because the fortress was about to fall from the inside out, I bypassed the upper floors, watching the glowing numbers on the elevator doors change as I descended deeper into the heart of the precinct. 412 floor, 410 floor 8. According to Amelia's intel, Julian had locked himself inside the secure evidence sublo, located 3 floors below the ground. When I reached the sublo doors, I stopped. I hung suspended in the darkness, listening carefully. The heavy steel doors to the evidence room were directly in front of me. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of a massive industrial shredder grinding paper, and the sharp, frantic voice of Captain Julian barking orders at the few loyal men he had left. I pulled a small, flexible fiber optic camera from my vest and slid it under the gap in the elevator doors. The small screen on my wrist lit up. The evidence room was absolute chaos. Stacks of files were being thrown into fire barrels. 2 tactical guards stood nervously by the main entrance, their weapons drawn, and sitting behind a heavy metal desk in the center of the room, sweating through his expensive suit, was Captain Julian. He was frantically typing on a laptop, wiping the offshore banking servers clean. He thought he was untouchable. He thought the heavy steel doors and the armed guards could keep the devil outside. I put the camera away and pulled 2 heavy concussive flashbangs from my vest. I didn't need to be silent anymore. The infiltration was over. The execution had begun. I placed a specialized shaped breaching charge directly on the center seam of the elevator doors. I anchored myself to the rappelling line, pulled the detonator, and braced for the impact. The detonator in my hand glowed soft green in the pitch-black elevator shaft. Through the thick steel doors, I could hear Captain Julian screaming at his men to move the last hard drives to his armored SUV. The shredders whined over his voice. They thought they had time. They didn't know the clock had just run out. I squeezed the detonator. The shaped charge blew inward with the force of a thunderclap. The heavy steel elevator doors violently warped and tore completely off their hinges, slamming into the concrete floor of the evidence sublow in a cloud of blinding dust and shredded metal. Before the two tactical guards even fully registered the explosion, I threw the flashbangs through the smoke. The blinding white light and deafening blast knocked them flat against the wall, dropping their rifles to their knees, clutching their ears in absolute agony. I swung through the opening on my rappelling line, landing perfectly on the debris-covered floor. I unclipped the carabiner with one smooth motion, bringing my tactical assault rifle up to my shoulder. "Drop it!" I roared over the ringing in their ears. The guards were disoriented, gasping in the smoke. One of them blindly reached for his sidearm. I didn't hesitate. I fired two suppressed non-lethal rubber rounds directly into his chest plate. The impact cracked his ribs and dropped him instantly, gasping for air on the floor. The second guard immediately threw his hands in the air, terrified. I kicked their weapons away into the darkness. I stepped through the swirling smoke and burning paper toward the center of the room. The massive fire barrels were crackling, throwing violent shadows against the concrete walls. But the heavy metal desk was empty. The laptop was smashed on the floor. Captain Julian was gone. I checked the floor. Wet boot prints led away from the desk toward a heavy reinforced steel emergency exit at the back of the subway. The door was slightly ajar. The lock violently blasted off from the inside. He had used the explosion as cover to abandon his men and run. I keyed my encrypted radio. "Amelia, do you have eyes on the perimeter?" Static hissed in my ear for 3 agonizing seconds before her voice cut through. "Victor, he's heading for the waterfront. He didn't take an SUV. He's moving toward the abandoned shipyard on Pier 9. He has a private untraceable speedboat waiting for him." "Understood," I said, my voice cold as ice. "Victor, wait," she shouted. "The state police are 3 minutes out. Let them take him. The evidence is secured." "You don't have to do this. The law secures evidence, Amelia," I replied, staring at the shattered emergency door. "The law doesn't understand the silence of the lake. I do." I cut the transmission and sprinted through the emergency exit. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country, because the final judgment was about to be delivered in the fog. The rain had stopped, but a thick, suffocating marine fog had rolled in off the dark water by the time I reached the abandoned shipyard on Pier 9. The air smelled of salt, rusted iron, and rotting wood. Massive decaying shipping containers loomed like steel mountains in the mist. I pulled my thermal scope, sweeping the docks. The fog was too dense. It scattered the infrared signature. I had to hunt him the old-fashioned way. I had to use my ears. I walked silently among the shipping containers. My rifle raised. The only sound was the heavy lapping of the dark water against the wooden pylons. Suddenly, a loud metallic clang echoed through the fog 50 yards to my left. It was the sound of a heavy boot slipping against wet steel. I didn't run. I moved with absolute terrifying patience, weaving through the rusted containers like a ghost. I reached the edge of the pier. There, sitting low in the dark water, was a sleek black speedboat. The engine was already idling quietly, and standing on the edge of the wooden dock, frantically trying to untie the heavy mooring rope with shaking bloody hands, was Captain Julian. His expensive suit was torn, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was breathing heavily, terrified, constantly looking over his shoulder into the impenetrable fog. He pulled his heavy service revolver, pointing it blindly into the mist. "Show yourself!" Julian screamed, his voice cracking with pure panic. "I am the captain of this city. I am untouchable." "You hear me? I am untouchable." I stepped out from behind the heavy steel container, the fog swirling around my boots. I lowered my rifle, letting it hang on its sling, and drew my heavy combat knife. "You aren't untouchable, Julian," I said softly, my voice cutting through the fog like a razor. "You are just a man who drowns children for money, and you have run out of water to hide in." Julian stared at the cold, flat blade of my combat knife, his eyes wide and frantic in the swirling fog of the shipyard. He was backed all the way to the edge of the wooden pier, the dark freezing water lapping hung gently against the pylons just inches behind his expensive leather shoes. He didn't look like a captain anymore. He didn't look like a man who controlled an entire city's underworld. He looked exactly like what he was, a terrified, pathetic coward who had finally run out of places to hide. "You don't have to do this, Victor," Julian stammered, his heavy revolver shaking so violently in his grip that I could hear the internal cylinder rattling. "I have money. Millions. Untraceable accounts. I can give you everything. I can give you a new life." I didn't stop walking. My boots made a slow, deliberate sound against the wet wood. The sniper in me evaluated his stance. His knees were bent slightly inward. His breathing was shallow and erratic. He was going to pull the trigger out of pure blind panic in exactly 3 seconds. "I don't want a new life, Julian," I said, my voice barely a whisper above the sound of the ocean. "I want my daughters." 1, 2, 3, Julian screamed, squeezing his eyes shut, and fired his heavy revolver blindly into the fog. The muzzle flash was blinding, the deafening crack echoing off the rusted shipping containers, but I was already gone. Before the first bullet even tore through the space where my chest had been a millisecond ago, I dropped into a low, aggressive slide across the slick wooden planks. I swept my heavy combat boot violently through the back of his knees. The impact cracked like dry firewood. Julian screamed again, his legs buckling completely. He collapsed backward, his arms flailing wildly as his heavy body hit the freezing dark water with a massive violent splash. The revolver clattered uselessly onto the wooden dock. He broke the surface instantly, thrashing in the icy current, gasping for air, desperately clawing at the slippery algae-covered pylons. The expensive suit that he thought made him untouchable was now a heavy waterlogged anchor dragging him down. "Help me," he choked out, spitting salt water, his fingers slipping off the rotting wood. "Victor, please, the water is too cold. I can't swim in this." I walked to the very edge of the pier and knelt down, my face completely devoid of emotion. I pulled the waterproof smartwatch from my tactical vest. I tapped the cracked screen and pressed play, holding the tiny speaker out over the dark water. The audio file began. Harper's terrified cries mixed with the heavy, violent splash of the lake, and then the cruel, endless laughter of Julian's men. Julian froze in the freezing water, his eyes locking onto mine, as the horrifying sound of his own sins echoed through the fog. The realization hit him harder than any bullet ever could. He wasn't just drowning in the ocean, he was drowning in exactly what he had created. She was 10 years old, I whispered into the mist, slipping the watch back into my pocket, and she was counting. I stood up and turned my back to the water. I didn't shoot him. I didn't cut him. I just let the freezing, unforgiving ocean do exactly what his men had done to my little girl. I walked away as his thrashing slowly, inevitably stopped, swallowed completely by the silence of the fog. By the time the sun began to rise over the city, the heavy storm clouds finally broke, casting long, golden lines of light across the wet pavement. The news cycle was absolute chaos. Amelia had not waited for the morning. She released the entirety of Logan's encrypted files, the offshore routing numbers, and the warehouse surveillance photos to every major federal agency and news outlet in the country simultaneously. The state police raided the precinct before the sun was fully up. Every remaining dirty cop, dirty judge, and syndicate member tied to Julian's empire was in handcuffs by noon. The route had finally been shut down for good, cut off completely at last. I didn't linger behind to watch the arrests take place. Ghosts don't belong out in the sunlight, not after everything I'd done to become one. I loaded my heavy Pelican case into the back of a rented, forgettable truck, parked quietly at the edge of the city limits. Nothing about it drawing attention, nothing about it memorable. I rolled the window all the way down, letting the crisp, clean morning air rush across my face. For the first time since I had stepped off that plane, the crushing, suffocating weight that had been sitting on my chest for so long was finally, completely gone. I reached into my vest and pulled out Harper's crayon drawing, the little green turtle she had made for me. The edges of the paper were worn soft and thin, faded from being carried so close to my heart through everything that had happened. I looked at it for a long moment and smiled. A real, genuine smile this time, not the hollow kind I'd been forcing for weeks. I placed it carefully on the passenger seat right beside me, like it deserved a seat of its own. "We did it, Harper," I whispered softly, my voice barely audible even to myself. "Daddy is finally home." I shifted the truck into drive and pulled out onto the long, empty highway, disappearing down the open road, leaving the city behind me, and along with it, leaving behind the monster I'd had to become in order to save the people I loved. What a journey that was! The storm has passed, and the truth has finally come out into the light. Before you go, I have a question for you. If you were standing in Victor's place, out on that foggy pier, looking down at the man who destroyed everything your family had, would you have pulled the trigger? Or would you have let the dark water take him the same way Victor did? Tell me your answer in the comments below, and while you're there, let me know what city or country you're watching from tonight. If this story kept you glued to your seat, please take a moment to gently hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It genuinely helps this channel keep bringing these stories to life. I read every single comment when planning the next video, so tell me, what kind of intense, emotional story do you want to hear next? More tactical military revenge? Quiet family betrayals? Shocking corporate takeovers? Let me know, and I'll write it specifically for you. Until we meet again in the next thrilling story, take care of yourselves, and protect the people you love.